The Vashan Empire had conquered over 1,000 worlds, and Earth was just another weak, primitive planet waiting to fall. At least that was what High Lord Salvat believed as he gazed at the holographic projection of the blue-green world rotating before him. These humans, Salvat scoffed, his fanged mouth curling in amusement. They barely have space travel. They still burn chemicals to reach orbit. Their weapons are centuries behind even the lowest of our vassals. And yet, he turned his crimson eyes toward the warlords gathered around the Galactic command table. The room, a grand hall aboard the Empire's flagship Dominator's Wrath, was filled with the finest military minds of the Empire. Every one of them had participated in the subjugation of countless species. They refused to surrender. The warlords erupted into laughter. Surrender? To what end? One of them chuckled. What could these creatures possibly believe will save them? Salvat allowed himself a smirk. The humans had indeed been given the same offer as every other civilization before them. Bow before the Empire and become part of the galactic hierarchy. At the bottom, of course, or face total annihilation. Most species accepted the inevitable. They laid down their arms before the first fleet even arrived, understanding that resistance was futile. Those who did resist, well, none of them existed anymore. Yet, humanity had responded in a way that no species had before. They had simply said, "Come and try." That amused Salvat greatly. He leaned forward, placing his armored hands on the table. "Then let us oblige them." The holographic display shifted, showing the might of the Vashan invasion fleet. Over 100 warships, each the size of a city, armed with weapons capable of reducing continents to rubble. Swarms of smaller attack craft, planetary assault carriers, and legions of battle-hardened Vashan warriors stood ready. The humans, on the other hand, had nothing of significance. A handful of orbital defense platforms, a few space stations, and some crude missile-based planetary defense systems. Their ships were laughably small and slow, incapable of FTL travel beyond their own system. They had no fleets, no colonies, no chance. "Begin the invasion," Salvat ordered. "Let the humans witness the might of the Vashan." Across the fleet, war horns sounded as the armada began its approach. The first wave of attacks would be simple: disable Earth's satellites, shut down their communications, and destroy their orbital infrastructure. The humans would be blind and helpless before the main invasion even began. It was a routine operation. But then, something strange happened. As the first Vashan warships entered Earth's orbit, targeting systems flickered. Several ships lost their connection to the Empire's main battle network. Sensor readings became distorted. A wave of static washed over communications channels, followed by garbled signals that sounded eerily like whispers in an unknown language. Then, in the silence that followed, a new signal cut through all frequencies. A human voice, calm but resolute, spoke 3 words. "We were waiting." Salvat's smirk faded. This was not routine. Something was very, very wrong. Salvat's crimson eyes narrowed as the human transmission crackled through the command deck. "We were waiting." The word sent an unfamiliar sensation crawling up his spine. Was it unease? No, impossible. The Vashan did not feel such things. This was merely an unexpected anomaly, one that would be crushed like all the others before it. He straightened, his voice cold and commanding. "Re-establish control over our battle network. I want full scans of that planet. Find out where that transmission came from." A moment of silence. Then a technician stammered, "My lord, the scans err." The Dominator's Wrath shook violently. Klaxons blared as the massive battleship lurched, its inertial dampeners struggling to compensate. Salvat's claws gripped the war table as data scrolled across the holographic display. An impact? No, that was impossible. Nothing in this system cooled. Then the reports came in. Multiple ships hit, casualties confirmed. Salvat's gaze snapped to the tactical display. Red indicators, Vashan ships, were vanishing. Explosions bloomed in the blackness of space, fire and debris spreading from smoldering wreckage. The Vashon fleet, a force that had brought entire civilizations to their knees, was under attack. But from where? Where is the enemy fire coming from? He snarled. I see no ships. The sensors remained blind. The battle network refused to respond. Someone had taken control of it. Another explosion rocked the fleet, a destroyer breaking apart as something unseen ripped through its hull. Then another, and another. The Vashon weren't just losing ships, they were being hunted. And then, through the static, another human transmission broke through. Did you think we would fight in the open? That we would meet you head-on in some glorious battle? No, we studied you. We learned from those you conquered. And we saw how predictable you are. Zolvat's blood ran cold. The humans had known they were coming. Far below, on the surface of Earth, inside a hidden military bunker buried beneath the Arctic ice, General Elias Carter watched the battlefield unfold. Targets confirmed, the AI reported in a neutral voice. Phase 1 successful. Engaging Phase 2. Carter exhaled slowly. For years, humanity had known this day would come. They had watched the stars, listened to the whispers of fallen civilizations, and prepared in secret. The Vashon expected a primitive, defenseless world. They were wrong. From hidden launch sites across the moon and deep within Earth's oceans, the real war began. Massive railgun platforms, long buried beneath the lunar surface, fired their second volley. Hypersonic slugs, coated in advanced stealth materials, tore through space at near-relativistic speeds. The Vashon ships never saw them coming. They didn't even have time to raise their shields. Another warship exploded, then another. The humans weren't fighting for honor. They weren't fighting to prove themselves. They were fighting to win. Aboard the Dominator's Wrath, chaos reigned. We can't lock onto their weapons. We don't even know where they're firing from. A lieutenant shouted. Zolvat's claws dug into the command table. This wasn't possible. This world was supposed to be nothing. The humans weren't supposed to be capable of this. And yet they were outmaneuvering the greatest war machine in the galaxy. Then the final horror arrived. A new contact appeared on the edge of the battlefield. Massive, silent, a warship, but unlike anything the Vashon had ever seen. Its hull was black as the void, its form shifting with impossible angles, as if space itself bent around it. It hadn't been there moments ago. It had simply appeared. And then the whispers began. Not over the comms, in their minds. Ancient, terrible, awakened. The Zolvat, for the first time in his long and merciless life, felt the one thing he had never known. Fear. Zolvat's breathing came in ragged gasps as he stared at the monstrosity that had appeared from nowhere. The ship, or whatever it was enormous. Larger than any Vashon dreadnought. Its black surface seemed to consume light, shifting with unnatural fluidity. It had no visible weapons, no energy signatures, no discernible form of propulsion. It should not exist. And yet there it was, drifting silently toward them. Then the whispers grew louder. You were warned. Zolvat clutched his head, his vision blurring to something. Some force reached into his mind. The control deck erupted in chaos as his officers collapsed, screaming in agony. Weapons systems flickered. Shields fluctuated. The once mighty fleet of the Vashon was no longer just under attack. It was breaking. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, inside a classified research facility, Dr. Eleanor Voss watched the unfolding battle from a reinforced control room, surrounded by screens displaying real-time data. The ship, the Nyx, was finally awake. For decades, it had been buried beneath the ocean, an impossible relic of a forgotten war, discovered by deep-sea drilling teams in the early 21st century. No records of it existed. No civilization should have been able to build it. And yet there it was, hidden away, studied in secret, waiting. Humanity had spent years trying to unlock its mysteries, but it refused to respond to any command. Some believed it was nothing more than a dead husk. Others whispered that it was waiting for something. Then the Vashon arrived, and the Nyx opened its eyes. "All readings are spiking," a technician reported. "We're detecting an energy field, but it's like nothing we've seen before. It's affecting the enemy fleet's systems, shutting down their neural links, disrupting their AI networks." Voss narrowed her eyes. No, it wasn't just affecting their systems. It was reaching into their very minds. "This ship isn't just a weapon," she whispered. "It's alive." Aboard the Vashon flagship, Dominator's Wrath, Zalvat staggered as visions flooded his mind. Flashes of battles long before the Vashon Empire had existed. Armies consumed by fire, planets crumbling into dust, and above it all, the Nyx, drifting through the wreckage like a phantom of war. It was ancient, far older than his empire, far older than the galaxy as he knew it, and it was angry. Across the battlefield, the impossible ship finally moved. It did not fire conventional weapons. Instead, reality itself seemed to twist around it. The nearest Vashon warship, a battlecruiser large enough to glass entire continents, was simply gone. No explosion, no debris, just erased. Panic spread through the Vashon fleet. They had faced resistance before. They had crushed rebellions, exterminated entire species. But never, not once, had they faced something that could erase them from existence without a trace. For the first time, the mighty empire did something it had not done in millennia. It hesitated. Back on Earth, in the Arctic command bunker, General Elias Carter watched the battle with grim satisfaction. The plan was working. The Vashon had underestimated humanity. They had assumed this war would be easy, that Earth would fall like all the others. But they had never faced an enemy like this. Carter turned to his officers. "Initiate Phase 3. Across the solar system, hidden defense platforms, once thought to be abandoned relics, activated simultaneously. Artificial intelligence networks took control, optimizing the Nyx's growing influence over the battlefield." The time for defense was over. Now, humanity was going on the offensive. The Nyx drifted through the void like a silent predator, its black hull warping light around it. It had no propulsion, no visible weapons, and yet the Vashon fleet was breaking. Massive warships, each the pinnacle of the Empire's military might, were vanishing one by one. No fire, no wreckage, just gone. Zalvat clenched his claws, fighting against the terror gripping his mind. This was impossible. Humanity should not have been capable of this. This was a primitive world, one that still fought among itself, that lacked even the most basic galactic technology. And yet, their warships were falling, their fleet was crumbling, and their own systems were failing without a single conventional shot fired. "Status report," he snarled, voice laced with fury. A technician, his skin paler than before, turned to him. "My lord, we've lost contact with over 30% of the fleet. Their transponders just stopped existing. Sensors show distortions near that unidentified ship, but we still can't get a lock on what it's doing." Another officer's eyes widened in horror. "I think it's not firing on us at all. It's manipulating space itself." Zalvat's claws dug into the war table as his blood ran cold. This was not a battle. This was slaughter. And the worst part, humanity had not even fully counterattacked yet. Then, across the battlefield, the second wave began. From the surface of the moon, hidden beneath layers of rock and reinforced bunkers, the real weapons of Earth came online. Massive railgun batteries, disguised as outdated lunar structures, locked onto their targets. There was no warning, no energy signature, just sheer, unrelenting physics. The first salvo struck a Vashon dreadnought, a hypervelocity tungsten slug, twice the size of a human tank, punched through its shields, tore through its armored hull, and kept going. The warship cracked apart, spilling fire and atmosphere into space. More slugs followed. One by one, ships exploded under the relentless assault. The Vashan shields, designed for energy-based combat, were useless against this kind of brute force. Their armor, forged to withstand plasma fire, shattered like glass against the sheer kinetic energy of the attacks. Panic rippled through their forces. They had never faced an enemy like this. But Earth wasn't finished. Across the oceans, hidden beneath the depths, something stirred. Massive submarines, long believed to be relics of human history, rose from the depths, each carrying payloads far beyond what the Vashan had considered possible for a primitive species. They weren't nuclear weapons. No, these were far worse. Kinetic harpoons, unmanned, self-guided projectiles designed to launch from Earth's surface, bypass planetary defenses, and impale enemy warships. They weren't fast. They didn't need to be. Once launched, they could drift for hours, days, even waiting until the perfect moment to strike. And now, those moments had arrived. Aboard the Dominator's Wrath, Zalvat's mind raced. How had the Empire's intelligence missed this? How had they failed to detect any of these weapons? The answer was terrifyingly simple. Humanity had known they were coming, and instead of flaunting their strength, they had hidden it. They had played weak, played dumb, played prey. And now, when the enemy had come to devour them, the trap had closed. A new transmission cut through the void. A human voice, calm and cold, echoed through the fleet. You thought we were helpless. You thought we were weak. You were wrong. And for the first time in history, the Vashan Empire realized it was no longer the apex predator of the galaxy. Zalvat's mind was a storm of disbelief and fury as the battlefield collapsed around him. The mighty Vashan fleet, the pride of an empire that had crushed 1,000 civilizations, was being torn apart by a species that should not have even posed a threat. His warships, designed to dominate lesser beings, were failing against weapons that had no energy signatures, no predictable trajectories, and no mercy. The Nyx drifted like a phantom in the void, an ancient horror that had now turned its wrath upon them, while Earth's hidden arsenal struck from every angle. It was chaos. It was slaughter. More explosions erupted as another dreadnought broke apart, its engines torn free by a kinetic harpoon launched from beneath Earth's oceans. The weapon had taken nearly 6 hours to reach its target, drifting in silence before correcting its course in the final moments. It had not been fired in desperation. It had been calculated, planned, and now, the Vashan Empire was paying the price for its arrogance. On the bridge of the Dominator's Wrath, Zalvat turned to his officers, his voice cold and controlled despite the growing panic around him. Full retreat. Now. But the words had barely left his mouth when the Nyx moved again. It did not fire weapons. It did not launch attacks. It simply existed, and in doing so, it rewrote the rules of the battlefield. Space around it rippled, and in an instant, 4 more Vashan warships ceased to be. No explosion, no wreckage, just gone. The remaining ships faltered, crew members screaming over the comms as their neural links shattered under the unseen force radiating from the impossible vessel. Something inside the ship was awake, and it was feeding. Zalvat gritted his teeth. This was not just a defeat. This was an annihilation. The Empire's forces had been outmaneuvered, outgunned, and outthought at every turn. And now, they were being hunted. He slammed his clawed hand against the command panel. All surviving vessels, jump to FTL. Get us out of this system. For the first time in Vashan history, the Empire's forces turned their backs on an enemy and fled. Engines roared to life as the remaining warships prepared to break away. But then the humans spoke one last time. Leaving so soon. The voice was different now. Not taunting, not angry, just cold. Zalvat's breath caught in his throat. The Nyx pulsed, and suddenly, space itself locked down. The fleet's FTL drives flickered. Error messages flashing across every ship. They couldn't leave. They couldn't run. Then the whispers returned. But this time, they spoke only one thing. You don't get to leave. And in that moment, High Lord Salvat understood the truth. This wasn't just a battle. It wasn't even a war. This was a reckoning. Salvat's breathing was ragged, his claws trembling against the control table as the terrible truth settled in. The Nyx had sealed the battlefield, twisting the fabric of space itself to prevent their retreat. The remaining Vashan ships, once the unchallenged apex predators of the galaxy, were trapped like cornered beasts. This had never happened before, never in the Empire's long and ruthless history. They had always been the ones to dictate when a battle ended, when an enemy was exterminated, when a world was no longer allowed to exist. Now, the choice was no longer theirs. Panic flooded the fleet-wide channels. Officers screamed over the comms, demanding solutions, begging for reinforcements that would never come. They had been sent here in arrogance, certain of an easy victory. There were no reserves waiting in the dark, no secondary fleets prepared to intervene. The Empire had believed this war was already won before it began. And now, they were dying. The Nyx pulsed again, and 4 more warships vanished, their very existence erased in an instant. Salvat could feel it now, the force that radiated from the ship like an unseen tide. It wasn't a weapon. It was something deeper, something older than their understanding of war itself. It wasn't destroying ships. It was consuming them. He could almost hear the whispers beneath the static, the feeling of something watching, studying, feeding. Then the human spoke. "You took your time coming here," the voice said, General Elias Carter's, calm and resolute. "We always knew you would. We just didn't know when." A pause. "But now that you're here, tell me, how does it feel to be the hunted?" Salvat's rage flared, momentarily breaking through his fear. "You think this changes anything?" He snarled, slamming his fist onto the table. "We are the Vashan. We have ruled for centuries. Even if you win this battle, you cannot stop the Empire." His voice rose with fury. "You cannot stop the inevitable." Carter's voice remained infuriatingly even. "Inevitable." A humorless chuckle. "You don't even realize what's happening, do you?" Salvat's mandibles twitched. "Enlighten me, human." "You didn't just invade Earth," Carter said. "You activated something that should have never been touched." The general's voice dropped to something quieter, almost reverent. "We never built the Nyx. We never understood it. We just found it." A pause. "And now it's awake." The whispers surged through the bridge like a cold wind, pressing into Salvat's mind with impossible knowledge. He saw visions, not of human history, but of something far older, something that had existed before the Vashan, before the Empire, before everything they knew. Civilizations rising and falling. Species that had once called themselves conquerors only to be erased. The Nyx had been there for all of it, waiting, watching. A sick realization struck him. The humans had never been the real threat. It was the Nyx. And now, it had chosen Earth. Salvat's vision blurred as his officers screamed, the fleet collapsing one ship at a time. This wasn't war. This was a message. And the Empire would hear it for generations to come, if any of them survived to remember. Salvat could no longer tell where his thoughts ended and the Nyx's presence began. The alien force coiled through his mind like a living thing, peeling away layers of arrogance, of certainty, of dominance. Everything that had defined the Vashan for millennia. He saw the Empire through new eyes, not as an unchallenged force of nature, but as a fleeting, insignificant thing, no different than the countless others that had risen and fallen before it. The Nyx had seen them all. It did not care for their conquest, their empire, their belief in supremacy. The Vashan were nothing to it, dust waiting to be scattered. Salvat wrenched himself free of the vision, gasping for air. Around him, his bridge crew lay slumped over their consoles, eyes glassy, minds shattered by whatever they had glimpsed. Outside the viewport, the remnants of the fleet drifted like broken toys, their once mighty warships silent, powerless, dead. The Nyx had not fired a single shot. It had simply unmade them. But not all. Some ships still remained, damaged, flickering with failing power, their crews barely clinging to sanity. They were the survivors, the ones chosen to live, because the Nyx wanted them to. The human general's voice cut through the silence, steady and cold. "You're going to leave now." Zalvat clenched his fists. "And if we don't?" The words felt hollow. He already knew the answer. "You will." Carter's voice was calm, absolute. "Because you understand now, don't you? This was never a war. This was a warning." Zalvat's mandibles tightened as rage and humiliation twisted inside him. The Empire had sent its mightiest fleet to annihilate a backwater species, and yet here he was, reduced to nothing but a survivor, allowed to leave like a stray animal sent scurrying back to its master. But he also knew the truth. If he refused, if he so much as hesitated, the Nyx would finish what it started. With a voice that felt like it belonged to someone else, Zalvat gave the command. Surviving vessels, retreat. Engines flickered to life. The few remaining Vashan ships, shattered, humiliated, turned away from Earth's orbit and limped into the void. The Nyx did not pursue. It did not need to. The message had been delivered. As the Dominator's raft prepared to jump to FTL, Zalvat cast one last glance at the cursed blue planet below. A world the Empire had dismissed as weak, pathetic, beneath their notice. And yet it was still standing, untouched. The Vashan were not the apex predators of the galaxy. Humanity was something far worse. The void stretched endlessly as the remnants of the Vashan fleet limped home, their once glorious armada reduced to a handful of shattered warships. The silence on the bridge of the Dominator's wrath was absolute. No one spoke. No one dared. They had left the battlefield not as conquerors, but as survivors, allowed to live by a power they could not comprehend, could not challenge, could not escape. Zalvat sat rigid in his command throne, his body tense, his mind trapped in an unrelenting storm of rage and humiliation. His claws dug into the armrests, carving deep grooves into the metal. This was not how it was supposed to be. Humanity was meant to be crushed. Their world was supposed to burn. The Empire had never lost to an inferior species before, and yet, here they were, retreating like beaten prey. And the worst part, they had no way to retaliate. The Nyx was not a warship. It was something else, something that should not exist. It had erased warships like they were mere thoughts. It had unmade entire squadrons without firing a single shot. And the humans, they had wielded it like a dagger in the dark. They had known the Vashan were coming and had waited, hidden in the shadows, biding their time. This was no lucky victory. This had been a trap from the beginning. Zalvat exhaled sharply, forcing himself to think beyond the shame of defeat. There had to be a way forward, a way to reclaim the Empire's dominance. He turned toward his surviving officers, their faces drawn and pale, their minds still reeling from the horror they had witnessed. "We do not speak of this." His voice was iron. "What happened in the Sol system does not leave this fleet. The High Council cannot know. Do you understand?" His officers hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. One finally spoke. "My lord, they will ask. They will demand to know why we failed." Zalvat's mandibles tightened. Failure was unacceptable. But this was worse. If the Council knew what had happened, if they understood the true nature of humanity, they might make the wrong choice. They might send another fleet, and the Nyx would be waiting. "No reports," he growled. "No records. We say nothing." His eyes burned with the weight of the decision. "We let the humans believe they have scared us away." He saw understanding dawn in his officers' eyes. This was not surrender. It was survival. The Vashan had ruled the stars for centuries, and they would adapt. They would find a way to defeat the Necks. One day. But for now, they would retreat, they would rebuild, and they would prepare. Because humanity had proven one thing beyond doubt. They were not prey. And the Vashan Empire had just learned what it truly meant to be hunted.